It all began on a bright morning in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods of the city, where luxurious cars lined the streets and grand villas towered over manicured gardens. The Arab millionaire, Ahmed, was a man of immense wealth and influence, known for his sharp business mind, striking looks, and a personality that demanded respect. He was also infamous for his arrogance. People admired him from afar, but few dared to approach him. He lived in a world so different from ordinary people that the simple act of stepping outside could feel like entering another universe. That day, Ahmed was preparing for the arrival of a new maid, someone who would take care of his household chores, meals, and daily errands. It was a routine part of his life, hiring staff, managing his properties, overseeing his businesses. But little did he know that this seemingly ordinary event would set the stage for something extraordinary. The maid, Aisha, arrived carrying her small bag, dressed modestly and nervously clutching a few personal belongings. She had grown up in a humble family and had always worked hard for everything she had. She wasn't used to grandeur, expensive furniture, or people who spoke in hushed tones out of fear or admiration. As she stepped into Ahmed's mansion, her eyes widened at the sight of the marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and a vast living space that seemed almost unreal. Every corner reflected wealth that she had only seen in magazines or on television. Yet, despite the overwhelming surroundings, there was something steady about her, an inner strength that didn't fade even when faced with the unknown. Ahmed watched her from a distance, leaning casually against the doorway. He had a reputation for being strict and often harsh with his employees, believing that respect had to be earned. When he first saw Aisha, he didn't think much of her, just another young maid, timid and unsure, someone who would follow instructions without question. But there was something in her demeanor that caught his attention. She wasn't overly shy or timid. Instead, she carried herself with quiet dignity, moving carefully yet confidently, as if she knew her worth, even if no one else acknowledged it. Their first interaction was brief and formal. Ahmed introduced himself, his voice calm yet commanding, and asked her name. Aisha, she replied softly, bowing her head slightly in respect. There was a pause, a moment when the air seemed to hang heavy with unspoken thoughts. Ahmed noticed her hands trembling just slightly, but her eyes remained steady. That combination of nervousness and resilience intrigued him more than he expected. As she toured the mansion, Ahmed gave her a quick overview of her duties: cleaning, organizing, helping in the kitchen, and maintaining order in the household. He spoke with precision, leaving no room for mistakes. Aisha listened carefully, nodding politely, her mind absorbing every instruction. She knew this was her chance to secure a stable job, but she also understood that working for someone like Ahmed required more than skill. It required patience, tact, and a calm presence. Throughout the morning, Ahmed observed her silently. He noticed the way she handled small tasks, the care she took in folding towels, arranging dishes, and navigating the grand spaces without a hint of fear or clumsiness. Most maids would have seemed overwhelmed, but Aisha moved with a quiet grace. It wasn't perfect, but it was genuine, and somehow that genuineness made her stand out. Even though Ahmed appeared aloof and distant, there was a spark of curiosity building inside him. He couldn't place it, but he felt a strange sense of anticipation, a feeling that this maid might be different from anyone he had met before. There was no immediate attraction, no dramatic moment of romance. Just a slow, subtle awareness that she was someone who might challenge the ordinary patterns of his life. By the end of the day, Aisha had settled into her duties, and Ahmed had returned to his study. Yet both of them were thinking about the encounter in their own way. Aisha reflected on the grandeur around her, feeling both intimidated and determined. She knew that surviving in this new environment required more than just physical labor. She had to maintain her composure, adapt quickly, and show that she was capable of more than anyone expected. Meanwhile, Ahmed couldn't shake the feeling that there was something unusual about her, something that set her apart from the many employees who had worked for him before. And so, their story began, not with fireworks or dramatic events, but with a simple meeting, a glance, and a quiet moment of observation. It was the kind of beginning that seemed ordinary to an outsider. Yet for Ahmed and Aisha, it would mark the start of a journey neither of them could have predicted. Little did they know that a casual interaction in a luxurious mansion would eventually lead to a story filled with laughter, surprise, challenges, and life-changing moments. Days passed, and Aisha began settling into her new life within the walls of the grand mansion. Yet the grandeur still overwhelmed her at times. She moved carefully from room to room, learning the intricate routines, the way Ahmed liked his books arranged, his clothes folded, and the expensive kitchenware handled. She was diligent, never rushing, always observing the smallest details. Despite her humility, there was a quiet confidence that she didn't even realize she possessed. She wanted to prove to herself more than anyone else that she could handle this world, so different from the one she had grown up in. Ahmed, meanwhile, watched from a distance, as he usually did with his staff. He had a sharp eye, and nothing escaped him. The slight hesitation when she picked up a delicate vase, the care with which she polished the silverware, or the way she politely acknowledged him without unnecessary words. Yet, in his mind, she was still just another maid, someone whose presence was necessary but unremarkable. Ahmed had grown used to the predictable patterns of life: wealth, control, admiration, and obedience. Most people around him either flattered him or feared him, and this maid seemed to do neither. That small defiance of expectation intrigued him more than he cared to admit. One afternoon, while Ahmed was preparing for a social gathering at the mansion, he saw Aisha trying on a simple dress for a small errand in the garden. The dress was modest, nothing extravagant, yet it fit her form in a way that caught his attention. Ahmed, who often made playful, sarcastic remarks, couldn't resist testing her. He leaned against the doorway with a half-smile and said, "If you fit in that dress perfectly, I'll marry you." The words were meant as a joke, a laugh among the mansion staff, and a playful exaggeration of his wealth and power. Everyone in the room chuckled nervously, unsure if they should laugh or remain silent. Ahmed himself smirked, believing the challenge was impossible to take seriously. In his mind, he thought of it as harmless entertainment, a way to amuse himself during an otherwise ordinary day. But Aisha froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The words hit her unexpectedly, mixing humiliation with something else she couldn't yet identify. She felt embarrassed, of course, but beneath that embarrassment was a spark of determination. She could have laughed awkwardly, apologized, or simply walked away, but something inside her stirred. She realized, in that moment, that this offhand remark could either humiliate her or become the very thing that pushed her forward. For the first time, Aisha's mind raced with ideas. She began imagining herself not as the timid maid everyone expected her to be, but as someone strong, confident, and capable of proving herself in a world that often underestimated her. She thought about her life so far, the struggles, the hard work, the countless moments when people had doubted her. And now, in the grandeur of the millionaire's mansion, she saw an opportunity, not just to rise above his mockery, but to rise above every expectation that had ever been placed on her. Ahmed, seeing her hesitation, thought she was intimidated. He chuckled and walked away, assuming the matter was over. But Aisha's mind was already at work. That evening, after her chores were done, she stood in front of a mirror, examining herself critically. She didn't see herself as beautiful or extraordinary, but she saw potential. She made a quiet promise. She would not let his words define her. Instead, she would transform them into motivation, proving to herself, and eventually to him, that she was more than anyone had imagined. In the days that followed, Aisha began small changes, improving her posture, paying more attention to her style, and learning the subtle ways to present herself with confidence. Every time she caught Ahmed glancing at her, she felt a strange mix of fear and thrill. She knew she had to remain composed, never let arrogance or impatience seep in, but also never lose the fire that now burned quietly within her. What started as a cruel joke, meant only to amuse the millionaire, had inadvertently planted the seed of transformation. Aisha was determined, quietly and steadily, to turn a mocking challenge into a personal mission. Little did she know that this one moment, the millionaire's careless words, would mark the beginning of a journey that would shake both their worlds, challenge their perceptions, and set the stage for a story far beyond anyone's imagination. After the millionaire's mocking words, Aisha couldn't stop thinking about them. "If you fit in that dress, I'll marry you," he had said, smirking as if it were the funniest thing in the world. At first, she had felt embarrassed, almost humiliated, but soon that embarrassment began to turn into something else, determination. For the first time in her life, she felt a fire inside her, a desire to prove that she was more than what people assumed. She didn't want to prove it to him alone. She wanted to prove it to herself. That evening, after finishing her chores, Aisha went to the small mirror in her room. She examined herself carefully, noticing every flaw and imperfection, but she didn't feel defeated. Instead, she imagined herself standing tall, confident, and graceful, as if she belonged in a world far beyond her current reality. She made a silent promise. She would work hard, not for anyone else, but for herself. She would become someone who could carry herself with pride, someone whose worth was undeniable. The next morning, Aisha began her transformation quietly. She started with small changes, improving her posture, walking with confidence, speaking more clearly, and paying attention to her appearance. She didn't have fancy clothes or expensive accessories, but she learned how to make the simple things she had look elegant. Her friends, who she occasionally met outside work, noticed a difference in her energy, the way she held herself, and even her smile, which seemed brighter, more assured. At the mansion, Ahmed began to notice subtle changes in Aisha as well. It wasn't her appearance alone. It was the way she moved, the calm confidence in her actions, and the quiet pride she carried. He had hired many maids before, but none had this presence. While he initially found it amusing, he couldn't help but feel intrigued. There was something different about her, something he couldn't quite understand or predict. Aisha didn't seek attention, but her transformation slowly started drawing it. She focused on learning new things, improving her skills, and taking pride in her work. Even the smallest tasks, folding clothes, organizing the kitchen, or serving meals, were done with care and precision. Her movements became deliberate and graceful, as if each action was part of a plan to carry herself with dignity. It was a quiet, steady transformation, one that didn't demand recognition but naturally earned it. One day, while serving tea in the living room, Ahmed paused mid-sentence as he looked at her. Something about her had changed completely. She wasn't just the maid who had arrived timid and shy months ago. She was poised, confident, and elegant, even in her simple uniform. For the first time, he felt a sense of curiosity mixed with respect, though he would never admit it openly. There was no immediate romance, no dramatic moment, just a quiet recognition that she was no longer someone to underestimate. As the days turned into weeks, Aisha continued her transformation. She read books, learned about etiquette, and polished her manners. She didn't change who she was inside. Her humility, kindness, and hardworking nature remained, but she learned how to express herself in a way that commanded attention and respect. The maid who had once been nervous and unsure now moved through the mansion with an air of quiet confidence that was impossible to ignore. Even the other staff noticed the change. They whispered among themselves about how Aisha had grown, how she carried herself with newfound elegance, and how she seemed to have a presence that demanded notice. They had expected her to remain shy and timid, but she had surprised everyone, including the millionaire. The playful words of Ahmed, meant as a joke, had inadvertently sparked this incredible transformation. What began as embarrassment became determination. What began as self-doubt became self-confidence. And though she never spoke about it, Aisha knew that this change was not just about fitting into a dress or impressing someone else. It was about discovering her own strength, resilience, and beauty. By the time months had passed, Aisha's transformation was undeniable. She wasn't just physically more confident. Her entire aura had changed. Ahmed, who had scoffed at her initially, now found himself noticing details he hadn't before. The way she smiled politely, how she moved gracefully, and the quiet intelligence in her eyes. Little did they both know, this was just the beginning. The mocking words that had once humiliated her would soon lead to a chain of events that neither of them could have imagined, shaping a story that was as unexpected as it was extraordinary. Months had passed since the millionaire, Ahmed, had made his mocking comment, and the mansion had grown quieter in some ways, yet full of subtle changes that only careful eyes could notice. Ahmed was busy as always, handling business calls, meeting clients, and managing his vast properties. But lately, he found his attention drifting in unexpected directions. It wasn't the business emails or investment plans that caught his eye. It was Aisha. The change in her was impossible to ignore. Gone was the timid, unsure maid who had first walked through the grand doors months ago. In her place was someone poised, graceful, and quietly confident. Every step she took, every small gesture, carried a sense of dignity that seemed to make the air itself pause. Ahmed noticed her folding the linens with care, arranging flowers in the drawing room, or even carrying a tray of tea. He had seen maids before, but none had this presence. It wasn't just about beauty or elegance. It was something deeper, something intangible that he couldn't quite define. At first, Ahmed tried to dismiss it. It's just her getting used to the mansion, he told himself. Anyone could do that with time. But time passed, and the quiet confidence she radiated didn't fade. Instead, it grew, drawing his attention in ways that made him uncomfortable. He realized he found himself watching her from a distance, noticing the curve of her smile, the way she carried herself, and how she interacted with others. Aisha's transformation wasn't flashy or showy. It was subtle, natural, and irresistibly magnetic. One afternoon, as he entered the study, he found her organizing documents in the living room. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows highlighted her calm composure. And for the first time, Ahmed paused, not out of business necessity, but out of pure curiosity. He studied her quietly, almost unconsciously comparing her to the timid girl he had scoffed at months ago. How could one person change so completely, yet remain the same at heart? It wasn't just her appearance that caught his attention. Ahmed began noticing her intelligence and efficiency. She anticipated needs before he even voiced them, handled unexpected situations calmly, and managed the other staff with quiet authority. The maid he had once thought of as ordinary was now someone who seemed almost extraordinary in his eyes. There was a sense of respect growing within him, an acknowledgement that she was no longer a subordinate to be dismissed, but a person of worth, skill, and presence. The realization unsettled Ahmed. He had always been in control, accustomed to admiration and obedience, but now he found himself questioning his assumptions. For the first time, he couldn't predict what Aisha would do next. She had defied expectations, quietly transforming herself into someone who could no longer be overlooked or underestimated. One evening, during a family gathering in the mansion, Ahmed found himself watching her interact with the guests. She moved gracefully among them, offering tea and refreshments, smiling politely, and engaging in conversations with ease. The way she carried herself suggested intelligence, warmth, and confidence, all qualities that he hadn't fully appreciated before. Every glance, every gesture seemed to reinforce a simple truth he couldn't ignore. He had misjudged her. That night, as Ahmed sat alone in his study, he reflected on the months that had passed. He realized that his careless words, the joke about the dress and marriage, had sparked a change that he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just a physical transformation. It was the growth of character, confidence, and dignity. And now, he felt something unfamiliar, admiration, respect, and perhaps even the stirrings of something more. Ahmed understood, perhaps for the first time in his life, that true presence wasn't about wealth, power, or arrogance. It was about quiet strength, resilience, and the courage to rise above what others expected of you. Aisha embodied all of that, and the more he observed, the more he recognized the gap between his own assumptions and reality. By the time the week ended, it was clear that the dynamics in the mansion had shifted. Ahmed's attitude toward Aisha was no longer dismissive or mocking. Instead, it was thoughtful, observant, and quietly intrigued. The millionaire, who had once scoffed at her, was now beginning to understand that this maid, humble, hard-working, and unassuming, had become someone impossible to ignore, someone who had captured his attention in ways he hadn't expected. Little did Ahmed know, this realization was only the beginning. The quiet attention he now paid to Aisha would eventually lead to moments of connection, unexpected emotion, and life-altering decisions. What had started as a mocking challenge was turning into a journey of mutual recognition, where respect, admiration, and perhaps even something deeper would begin to grow between two people from worlds apart. Life in the mansion continued as usual, yet for Ahmed and Aisha, the days were no longer predictable. What had started as routine interactions now carried a quiet tension, an unspoken awareness between them. Ahmed found himself noticing things he had never paid attention to before. The way Aisha's laughter could lighten a room, how her quiet confidence seemed to make even the grandest spaces feel more human. He tried to dismiss these thoughts, telling himself it was merely curiosity, yet deep down, he knew it was something more. The first unexpected encounter happened one rainy afternoon. Ahmed had been in the study, dealing with endless business calls, when he heard a knock on the door. Aisha stood there, holding a tray with tea and a few pastries. She hesitated slightly before entering, unsure if she should disturb him. But instead of leaving immediately after serving, she lingered for a moment, asking politely if he needed anything else. Ahmed looked up from his papers and found himself struck by the simple act of her presence. She wasn't demanding attention, nor was she trying to impress him. She was simply herself, composed, graceful, and quietly confident. For reasons he couldn't explain, he found the air around her different, almost magnetic. That brief encounter, lasting only a few minutes, left a mark on him, a subtle realization that this maid was unlike anyone he had ever known. Over the next few weeks, these small encounters began to multiply. Sometimes he would catch her in the garden, adjusting the plants or watering the flowers with careful attention. Other times, she would be arranging items in the living room, her movements precise yet effortless. Each time he watched, Ahmed noticed details that went beyond physical appearance, her intelligence, her patience, and the calm way she handled unexpected situations. He realized that she had grown into someone capable of commanding respect without demanding it. One afternoon, an unexpected challenge arose. A delivery arrived, a large shipment of rare, expensive goods that required careful handling. Normally, Ahmed would have supervised every detail himself, but this time, he noticed Aisha calmly taking charge. She organized the workers, checked the inventory, and ensured that nothing was damaged or misplaced. Ahmed watched silently, impressed and slightly stunned. He had expected her to struggle or make mistakes, but instead, she handled everything with grace and efficiency. This incident marked a turning point. Ahmed began to see her not as a subordinate, but as someone capable of managing responsibility, making decisions, and thinking independently. He started seeking her opinion on small matters, initially out of curiosity and gradually out of genuine respect. Aisha, aware of the shift, responded with her usual humility, never flaunting her abilities but quietly demonstrating her competence. Another unexpected encounter came during a social gathering at the mansion. Aisha, assisting with the preparations, moved through the guests with elegance and poise, serving refreshments and engaging in polite conversation. Several guests commented on her demeanor, impressed by her charm and confidence. Ahmed, who had initially scoffed at her, now felt a mix of surprise and admiration. The maid he had underestimated was gaining recognition in ways that even he hadn't anticipated. As these encounters accumulated, something subtle but undeniable began to grow between them, a sense of connection. Ahmed realized that his feelings toward her were shifting. He no longer viewed her through the lens of social hierarchy or mockery. Instead, he was noticing her as a person, someone with depth, strength, and resilience. And though neither of them spoke of it, the quiet acknowledgement of each other's presence created an invisible bond, delicate yet powerful. By the end of the month, Ahmed found himself waiting for these moments. The brief, unexpected encounters where Aisha's presence seemed to transform the ordinary into something extraordinary. He couldn't explain it, and he wasn't ready to admit it, but he knew that life in the mansion had changed. The maid who had once been the subject of a mocking joke was now someone he noticed with a mix of curiosity, respect, and something that felt startlingly like admiration. These small, unexpected encounters were shaping a new reality, one in which both Ahmed and Aisha were learning about each other, discovering qualities they had never seen, and slowly redefining the boundaries between them. What had begun as a casual challenge, a passing joke about a dress, was now evolving into a story neither of them could have predicted, a story that would soon challenge assumptions, break barriers, and lead to life-changing revelations. The mansion had grown quieter in the evenings, the hum of activity replaced by a calm stillness that allowed thoughts to settle and memories to replay. For Ahmed, these moments alone had become rare opportunities for reflection. He sat in his study one night, staring at the flickering light of the lamp, his mind returning again and again to Aisha. It was impossible to ignore the changes he had seen in her over the past months, and impossible to deny the impact she had begun to have on him. Ahmed's thoughts wandered back to the day he had made that careless, mocking comment. The words that had seemed funny at the time, "If you fit in that dress, I'll marry you." He had meant it as a joke, a playful taunt, never imagining that it would stir something deep inside Aisha, and in turn, change the course of both their lives. Now, he saw clearly that his words had been a spark, igniting a fire of determination and transformation in her, a fire that burned brighter than he could have anticipated. For the first time, Ahmed began to question his own behavior, his assumptions, and the ease with which he had judged others. He realized that he had underestimated Aisha, not because she was incapable, but because of his own arrogance, his own inability to see beyond social labels and appearances. She had quietly, steadily, reshaped herself, not for him, but for herself, and yet the effect it had on him was undeniable. He thought about the small moments, the way she moved with quiet confidence, the way she handled challenges with calm precision, the way she smiled politely but carried an air of dignity. Each memory brought with it a strange mix of admiration and guilt. How could he have laughed at her, scoffed at her, when she had always been capable of so much more? The realization pressed on him like a weight he could no longer ignore. Ahmed also noticed something deeper, something unexpected, a growing sense of respect and even fondness. He recognized that her resilience, her intelligence, and her grace had forced him to see the world differently. He had always believed that wealth and power dictated the terms of life, but Aisha's quiet strength reminded him that true worth came from character, courage, and self-belief. She had challenged his worldview without saying a single word, simply by being herself. He recalled a moment when he had seen her interacting with the other staff, guiding them with patience, encouraging them with kindness, yet never flaunting authority. She had a presence that commanded respect naturally, without arrogance, without pretense. That realization made him pause. Ahmed, a man used to control and admiration, felt something unfamiliar, a recognition that he had misjudged her and perhaps misjudged himself in the process. For hours, he reflected on what he had witnessed over the months. Every small encounter, every quiet gesture of hers had left an impression on him. He realized that he had been blind to the very qualities that made Aisha extraordinary. He had laughed, scoffed, and underestimated her. But now, he understood that her strength and transformation were far beyond anything he had imagined. In this quiet reflection, Ahmed felt a strange humility settle over him. He was used to being admired, used to having his words taken seriously, And yet here he was silently acknowledging the brilliance of someone he had once dismissed. There was no dramatic confession, no sudden revelation, just the slow, undeniable recognition that Aisha had changed him, had challenged his arrogance, and had opened his eyes to a world beyond his own ego. As he leaned back in his chair, Ahmed understood something profound. Life often surprises in ways that cannot be controlled. The playful, mocking challenge he had thrown at Aisha had become the catalyst for a journey neither of them could have predicted. And now, in the stillness of the mansion, he realized that admiration, respect, and even something more tender had begun to take root in his heart. For Ahmed, the reflection was both humbling and awakening. He had scoffed at a maid, yet months later, he found himself deeply aware of her presence, moved by her quiet power, and forever changed by the realization that true worth was not in wealth or status, but in courage, dignity, and self-belief. That night, he understood clearly that life had a way of teaching lessons in the most unexpected ways, and Aisha had just taught him one of the most important lessons of all. Life in the mansion had begun to feel different, though neither Ahmed nor Aisha admitted it aloud. The air was charged with a quiet tension, a sense of possibility that neither could fully name. What had started as casual interactions, polite gestures, and careful observation was now evolving into something more tangible. The turning point, as it would soon become, arrived one crisp afternoon, completely unannounced, and in the most ordinary of ways. The day began like any other. Aisha was attending to her tasks, moving through the mansion with her usual grace. She had learned over the months how to anticipate Ahmed's needs without being asked, how to manage the household with efficiency, and how to carry herself with quiet dignity. Ahmed, meanwhile, was engrossed in a series of important business calls, pacing the study with a restless energy that few had ever witnessed. Yet, for reasons neither could explain, their paths would cross in a way that neither would forget. It happened in the drawing room, where Aisha had been arranging flowers for a gathering Ahmed was hosting that evening. The arrangement was simple but elegant, each stem placed with care, each color chosen to complement the room's natural light. Ahmed, passing by, paused and looked at her work. He had seen flowers arranged countless times by maids, assistants, and event planners, but there was something different about this. The way she had combined simplicity with elegance, humility with subtle sophistication, struck him in a way he could not ignore. For the first time, Ahmed's admiration was impossible to conceal. He walked over, leaning slightly against the doorway, and watched as she adjusted the last few stems. Aisha, noticing him, straightened instinctively, unsure of what he might say. She had grown confident, yet his attention always carried a weight she could not entirely read. "This is impressive," Ahmed said quietly, his voice lacking its usual sarcasm. It was the first time he had spoken to her without a hint of mockery or superiority. Aisha blinked, surprised, but replied calmly, "Thank you, sir. I just wanted to look nice." Her modesty, so natural and unassuming, only deepened Ahmed's appreciation. That simple acknowledgement changed something. Ahmed realized that he had been looking at her all wrong. She was no longer merely the maid he had mocked months ago. She was a woman of vision, taste, and quiet intelligence. He found himself wanting to learn more about her thoughts, her perspective, her understanding of the world beyond the mansion walls. The turning point fully arrived during the evening gathering. Aisha was assisting with the event, ensuring everything ran smoothly, moving gracefully among the guests, offering refreshments, and responding to requests with poise. Guests noticed her calm efficiency, her ability to remain composed under pressure, and whispered about how remarkable she seemed. Ahmed watched, captivated. He realized that she had a presence that could not be ignored, a charm and dignity that transcended social boundaries. Later that night, as the gathering wound down and the mansion returned to its quiet state, Ahmed approached her again. This time, his demeanor was different, less commanding, less distant, and more curious. "You handled everything tonight perfectly," he said. "I underestimated you before." The words felt awkward even to him, but he spoke them sincerely. Aisha, ever humble, smiled softly. "Thank you, sir," she said, though inside, she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had worked hard, transformed herself quietly, and now, months later, her efforts were being recognized, not as a result of flattery, but because of her own merit. That moment marked a subtle but profound shift in their relationship. The barrier of arrogance, judgment, and misunderstanding began to crumble. Ahmed, for the first time, saw her as an equal, a person whose abilities, resilience, and intelligence demanded respect. And Aisha recognized, through his words and gestures, that her determination had not gone unnoticed. From that day onward, the mansion felt different. The interactions between them carried a new weight. Mutual recognition, quiet admiration, and a growing connection neither fully understood. What had begun as a mocking challenge about a dress had evolved into a turning point where respect replaced ridicule, awareness replaced ignorance, and possibility replaced doubt. It was no longer about fitting into a dress or proving someone wrong. It was about understanding each other, recognizing value where it had been overlooked, and beginning a journey towards something far greater than either of them had anticipated. That evening, as they both retired to their rooms, the mansion seemed to hum with the promise of change, a silent acknowledgement that life had shifted in ways neither could have predicted, and that the next chapter would be unforgettable. The months of quiet transformation, subtle glances, and unexpected realizations had brought them to a moment neither Ahmed nor Aisha could have predicted. The mansion, once a place of strict hierarchy and distant interactions, now seemed almost alive with a new energy. What had begun as a mocking comment, the careless words about a dress, had grown into a journey of resilience, recognition, and unexpected connection. It was a bright afternoon when the final chapter began to unfold. Aisha had been assisting with preparations for a small family gathering. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows, highlighting her calm composure and the quiet elegance she had cultivated over months of self-discipline and growth. Ahmed watched from a distance, his thoughts racing. He had come to admire her in ways that went beyond appearances. He respected her intelligence, her courage, and the dignity with which she carried herself. Yet, he now realized that admiration alone was not enough. The turning point came subtly, almost imperceptibly. Ahmed found himself walking toward her, unsure of what words to use, feeling an unfamiliar flutter of vulnerability. "Aisha," he began, his voice steady but soft. "There is something I need to say, something I should have realized months ago." She looked up, meeting his gaze with calm curiosity, not knowing what to expect. "I underestimated you," he continued. "I mocked you, I scoffed, and I made a foolish joke that I thought would amuse me. But you've shown me strength, patience, and grace that I have rarely seen in anyone. You've changed this house, and I realize you've changed me too." Aisha's heart skipped a beat. She had transformed herself not for him, not to earn praise, but his words carried weight she hadn't anticipated. She felt a quiet warmth, a sense of validation, not for the sake of flattery, but because her efforts had been acknowledged genuinely, sincerely. Ahmed stepped closer, his eyes searching hers for understanding. "I made a promise once, a careless one, and I want to honor it properly this time," he said. "If you'll allow me, I want to spend my life with you. Not because of a dress, but because of who you are, the person I have come to respect and admire more than anyone else in the world." There was a long pause, the room filled with quiet tension. Aisha thought back to the months of hard work, the transformation that had begun with determination and self-belief, the challenges she had overcome, and the quiet dignity she had maintained despite ridicule. She realized that this moment was more than just about the millionaire's words. It was about recognition, equality, and mutual respect. With a soft, genuine smile, she responded, "I never did this to impress you, but I always wanted to prove to myself that I could rise above what people expected of me. If you truly see me for who I am, then yes, I will accept." In that instant, the mansion seemed to exhale, as if acknowledging the journey that had led them here. The tension of the past months dissolved into a quiet, profound connection. What had begun as mockery had blossomed into understanding. What had started as a challenge had grown into love, mutual respect, and an unexpected partnership. The days that followed were filled with a new rhythm, a life neither had anticipated. Ahmed approached Aisha not as an employer, but as a partner, learning to see the world through eyes that now recognize humility, resilience, and courage as far greater than wealth or status. Aisha, in turn, carried herself with the same quiet strength, now unafraid to embrace a future where love and respect were mutual, not dictated by social hierarchy. Visitors to the mansion noticed the change immediately, not in grand gestures, but in the subtle warmth that flowed through the rooms, in the shared glances and easy conversations, in the quiet laughter that had never existed before. Two worlds, once divided by wealth and circumstance, had merged through patience, growth, and understanding. And so, the story that had begun with a mocking challenge about a dress ended in a way neither could have imagined. An unexpected ending filled with respect, admiration, and love. The Arab millionaire and the black maid, once separated by power and preconception, found unity in a journey of personal growth and mutual recognition, proving that sometimes life's most extraordinary stories begin with the smallest, most ordinary moments, and that true transformation, in both heart and soul, can turn ridicule into destiny.